Okay, so I was raised by a Southern litigator, so I don't do well with podiums, so y'all are going to have to kind of watch me pace as I talk. So Jeff and Angela, thank you all for the opportunity to come back. Last year's topic was cognitive dissonance, and cognitive dissonance is when you read something in the Wall Street Journal and you see one article, and then you read something that is totally contradictory, and you wonder whether you're losing your mind or not, or is this the current reality that we're living in? So when Jeff called me in January and said, hey, we'd love to have you back, he said, what are you thinking about? And interestingly enough, I was on the verge of kind of gearing up for what are we going to look like in 2050? And there are a couple of efforts going on with the North Texas Commission and other leadership groups as to what is the Metroplex going to be when we grow up. And I thought this was an interesting topic for this group. So what are we going to be like in 2050? And the answer is going to be a lot more complicated, but I think we need to take a trip back as you're kind of level setting on the future. It's really kind of interesting to look back 25 years, because when you start looking back to 1975 as an example, I was 15 playing basketball, didn't really care about anything. We just walked out of Vietnam. And you kind of take that 25-year stretch where the internet's invented and all the wall and everything changes in the world. You go back to 2000, so let's just reset. So our election in 2020 was, or in 2000 was Bush Gore. If you think about it, Clinton Gore left us with a $5 billion surplus. Who knew that government could actually do that? Everybody was worried about Y2K. The S&P was at 1,400 and the Dow was at 10,000, which everybody thought at the time was a freaking miracle. So today we're going to line up with round two of Biden and Trump. Our debt is $33 billion. We are now concerned about things like AI, which our first speaker did a great job on. The S&P is at 42 at the beginning of the year. We're at like 39 as of yesterday. So the world has changed in lots of different ways. But let's go back to the one constant in America. In 2000, the F-150 was the best-selling pickup, and today I don't really have any Ford stock, but F-150 is still the best-selling pickup in America. Gas is at $1.49, and today $3.40. And how many of you all remember dial-up? Waiting for that really nasty thing to come through the phone and crackle. It's like, oh my God, I'm in. Now, can I fire up my AOL and or my Earthlink and communicate and get my email? New concept. And today, we're dealing with Starlink. You can go basically anywhere in the world and have Wi-Fi. So the other piece of this is, how many of you all had a Nokia phone manufactured at Alliance, Texas? The brick, I so miss it. Today, we've got the iPhone. Faith Hill is the #1 song in America. American Beauty. My wife said, American Beauty, was that? Who was that? And nobody can remember, right? And then if you think about what we were working on at the office, the bricky computer monitor setup, and today you look at the streamlined Dell, and then you go to Barbenheimer as our picture of the year, and it's kind of amazing that we've come this far. Okay, so a couple of things, because I'm a dirt guy. I always think about the world in physical terms, not necessarily in philosophical terms. So in 2000, we were the 9th biggest city in the country. Today, we are #4. By 2030, we will pass Chicago. And it is rumored that by 2050, we will be right behind New York in terms of our population growth. So we're at basically 8.1 million today. And before you start feeling really good about yourself, I went online and looked up last night megacities. So Tokyo has 37 million people. The DFW Metroplex, when you look at world cities, we're kind of 61, 62. We're somewhere between Ho Chi Minh City and that place where COVID was manufactured in Wuhan. And if you look at Texas, we always think that everything's bigger in Texas, and I love that about us, but we're at about 30 million people, and that's the same size as Delhi, India. One city, one mega city in India is all of Texas rolled into one. We have a little bit more space than they do. And we also have running water and sewers. So go back to 2000. Let's level set from where we were and where we're going. Median household income at 48. Median age at 34, still in a remarkably young metropolitan area. And oh, by the way, the median home price, 131. What can you get for that? I'm not sure a tiny house, parked somewhere or a trailer gets you there. And interestingly, when Lindsay looked this up, mortgage rate was like at 8.1. So today, median household income, 78, age is 35.8, and median home price at 305, and mortgage rate at 7.9. Everybody's losing their minds. So the one thing, let's go back to the F-150 for a second. How many of you all remember the Super Bowl in 1981? Where Ford ran the commercial that said, hey, you too can get an F-150 today with the special Super Bowl rate at 25%. So we're living in an interesting world in terms of kind of where we're going on interest rates, but for those of us in the building business, we've seen it before, we've done it before, and we'll get through it again. So where are we demographically today in the Metroplex? 42% white, 16% black, 30% Hispanic, 8% Asian, and 4 other. Don't know what other category is, but we'll find out. What demographers will not tell us is kind of what the demographics of Texas are going to be, and particularly the Metroplex will be over the next 25 years, because that's kind of a black hole of where they're trying to figure out. But it's interesting. So from an educational standpoint, how do we compete? So 12% no high school diploma, 22% some high schools, 27% some college, 25% college degree, and 14% post-grad. We did a top 10 cities comparison, and interestingly, we're about, this education piece is pretty standard across the country, except for Washington, D.C., which is 40% college and post-grad. Kind of a fun stat to know and tell, but just kind of shocking when you think about the brain power that is around Washington and what comes out of it. Okay, so thanks to Isaac Manning Jr. in the back, who has created all these maps and all these exhibits for us today. But what I asked him to do is go back and figure out how you can show the change in population and growth of the Metroplex over time in a map. So this is the red on these screens. You're going to see 3 slides coming up. Red on the screen is where we built stuff. The kind of the pinkish putty color is farmed agriculture, and the rest of this is grazing and open space, grazing and open land. And the green out in West Texas, I have no idea how that got there because it ain't trees. So 2020, as you begin to scroll through this, you can see the red kind of working its way up north as we start approaching Oklahoma and the Red River. And in 2050, ESRI says we're going to add another, and this is a California-based company that doesn't understand land absorption in the Metroplex. They think we're only going to grow by another 11,000 or so acres. We're going to see a slide later on where I think that number is 800,000 based on what we do here for a living in the real estate business. So planning the future is a really kind of bizarre thing. And I was listening, the bad thing about being an architect who doesn't practice and doesn't stamp drawings is I have to do continuing education every year. And there was a really interesting thing on social and planning engagement where it said, nothing about us is for us without us. So in 2005, we had this brilliant idea at ULI to reach out to the COG, to UTA, and to go through a visual planning exercise of what our future is going to be like in 2050. So over a 2-year period, we did a series of public engagements where we literally put the Metroplex map on a table. Everybody had blocks, and they put what they thought their vision of the future was in terms of how density happens and where we go in the Metroplex. It was pretty fascinating. It took 2 years of public engagement run by Karen Waltz to develop this plan in 2050, and they came up with 5 scenarios of what the future in the Metroplex could possibly look like. So reasonable, rational, public engagement, feedback. No real defined course, but interestingly enough, 5 scenarios. So the first is business as usual. Let's just keep doing what we do in the development community, which is every crossroads, you put a retail center, then we put a bunch of houses around it, and wherever there's transportation, we go build stuff. The second is the connected centers. So if you think about crossroads of major interstates, development happens. If you now think about, and this is a plug for my son who's on Trinity Metro, if you think about rail lines and rail stops in other parts of the country, and particularly where DART's growing, some of their heaviest, densest centers are around rail stations. So this is the connected centers piece, which is promoting the 15-minute city where you can do everything within a 15-minute walk of where you live, work, and play, and or transport by rail or car. The next one is, and this is kind of typical of what we do in the Metroplex, which is we take all the federal dollars, we take the tax dollars, we go build roads, and guess what? Development follows the roads. How many of you guys have driven up the toll road, been to the PGA in Frisco? Anybody? Long ass way up there. I used to think that when you got to the IKEA at the toll road in 121, you were at the outer edge of the universe. I went up to PGA Frisco just to see how far we'd gotten in the Metroplex, and I'm going like, holy cow, it is a long ass way up here. So that is an example of the return on investment piece. Then the diverse and distinct communities, which is a really interesting idea that says downtown Dallas, downtown Fort Worth, uptown, Burleson Town Center, Frisco Town Center, McKinney, where we're going back to the small villages, and we want things that are going to be in places that are authentic. Go to Weatherford, go to downtown Aledo, which is kind of oxymoronic, but downtown Aledo is actually a real place. And you go look at these places, and this is kind of, we're going to grow around where historically town centers and village centers have been. The last one, which we're sucking at, is the green future. So last year, one of the things that I presented was more Isaac Hall Manning Jr. work was if we took all the floodplain in North Texas and integrated all of the different branches of the Trinity River, we could create the world's largest integrated open space system with over 890,000 acres of land and open space. And if we built within a 10-minute walk, we could have everyone in the Metroplex could, wherever you were located, could be within a 10-minute walk for, I think it was 40% of the Metroplex would be walkable to open space. If you took a fast walker and went 20 minutes out, everybody could be, 65% of the Metroplex could be have access to open space. Pretty cool. That's not what we're doing. So, from a development perspective and a growth perspective, I look at the world in terms of transportation, electricity. These are all things that we're finding in water, and these are the things that we're finding out. So this blurred map is the COGS Mobility 2045 plan. All the different colors are there to build our way out of our issues. So how many of you all spend more than 20 minutes a day in the car going somewhere? Unless you're lucky enough to live and work in Fort Worth, where we can pretty much get everywhere without a stoplight still. But what COG has done in terms of the level set of the mobility plan is they said, today we lose $12 billion a year in lost productivity with people sitting in a car. If we don't do the mobility 2050 plan or the 2045 plan, we're going to lose $60 billion of productivity. Staggering, right? And the sort of good news is if we do this plan, which only costs $94 billion, if we do this plan, we're only going to lose $30 billion a year in lost productivity by being in a car. This is where we are in terms of rail. So go back to the connected centers piece of the future that we looked at in one of the plans earlier. That's where we are today. This is where we're heading. And the expanded white lines, that's only $45 billion. Seems like a bargain. This is one of my favorite exhibits that Isaac found, which is the noise cone of the Metroplex. So I was selling houses over in River Hills, 15 years ago, and somebody said, oh my God, the toll road's going to be so loud. And I'm going like, have you woken up in the morning in Fort Worth and just walked outside, that's the background noise we all have in the Metroplex. But what's interesting about this is it really begins to define the airspace of the Metroplex. So look at DFW, the loudest place in the Metroplex. DFW, Alliance, Love Field, Meacham, those are kind of an inkling of where we're going. But that begins to start the air conversation. So the air conversation is pretty interesting. DFW lost its #2 rank. So in the world, Atlanta, how many of y'all have had to go through hell to get somewhere? God, that airport sucks. DFW is thrilling and charming and better than it used to be. #2 is Dubai. How's that for global recognition? And DFW's 3. DFW is currently doing 82 million passengers a year through that facility, and by 2030 they're projecting to do 100 million. DFW, interestingly, is also the #1 inbound location in the United States, meaning everybody that's coming here is coming through DFW, because if you've been to JFK or LAX, we're the right place because we have friendly people at TSA and immigration. What's interesting is Alliance exists because in the early 80s, everybody was trying to get traffic off of DFW. So the blue airports, or the blue planes, are the 4 reliever airports in the Metroplex. Alliance, Sphinx down in South Fort Worth, Redbird in Southeast Dallas, and McKinney Airport up north. The red locations are, think about airspace, think about autonomous flight, think about the home deliveries that we're now seeing drones start working on. So how the hell do we deal with airspace where planes are, helicopters are 500 feet, and below is where drone world is to drop your package in your front yard because you had to have that Whataburger. So this is the beginnings of air mobility. This is the power slide. All the green represents the superhighways of electricity coming into the Metroplex. The red are all the substations. And from workout on Walsh, looking at companies like Rivian and Panasonic and all these big companies looking to come in, every single one of these plants is 240 megawatts. That's the power that it takes to supply downtown Dallas. Same amount of power, 240 megawatts takes care of all of Dallas. That's one plant on one piece of land out in the middle of nowhere. It takes 18 to 36 months once you make a decision with Encore for them to go through the PUC to get power to your site. So think about all of the data centers that are going into southern Dallas, which apparently is now the new spot for data centers. Forget warehousing, data centers are now the thing. Power is what is one of our primary concerns. Interestingly, what's Texas's rank in wind? What's Texas's rank in solar? 1, believe it or not. We passed California. We are #1 in wind and solar power. So, but here, interestingly, is the power stack between where we were in 2000 and where we're going in 2024. And if you'll notice the shift to wind and solar, we've got natural gas. Coal is basically going away. And Encore will not project past 2035 because they can't figure out what the mix is going to be. They know they've got to have it. Their biggest concern, and we addressed this legislatively last session, which is the on-demand gas plants. When the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, there's an 18 to 20% gap in power. That's what leads to bad things like brownouts and blackouts, or the request from our utility providers to ask us to raise the thermostat, cut it down, shut off everything so that we can survive it. Here's the one that blew me away. This is from Texas 2036. So if you look at the black, the red, and the gray, that's kind of what we do every day today. That's our commercial, that's our residential, that's our industrial consumption of power. The blue, back to cognitive dissonance, is the use of electric vehicles in the fleet and the power required. We are basically going to have to double our electrical output in order to go to an all-electric fleet and do all the cool things that we like to do, like have air conditioning. And they haven't come for our gas ranges yet, but they will. The other one that's interesting to me is water consumption. So working with TRWD and with Dallas Water, the blue line is if we do all the conservation things that Water District is doing, we can basically brace out with demand. The black line that goes up to the upper right is if we don't do that stuff, we're screwed. Because Texas exists. Texas did not have a surface water lake other than Caddo Lake in East Texas until LBJ went to Congress. Think about that for a second. And then think about our water supply here today since the legacy of the 40s when Brown and Root and everybody from Houston was building all the surface water lakes in Texas. The water district thinks in 50-year terms, which is kind of staggering. They know where they are today, but those guys are looking out 50 years and going, we're going to need another reservoir somewhere in probably northeast Texas, but it takes them 50 years to bring that online. 25 years of permitting mess, 25 years to build it and relocate everybody before you get that water. So these guys are working today to make sure we can drink water in the year 2050. Kind of useful. So one of the things we did was go through a land absorption analysis and look at, so what are our trends today? So today, we are basically building about 382 acres of retail every year. Back in the days when we had malls, that was an easy layup. It was 100 acres at a time, and we just built the snot out of it and kept going. Multifamily requires, when you basically look at multifamily, our current absorption of land for multifamily in the Metroplex is about 1,100 acres a year. That's over 1 year's time. Interestingly, industrial, with the exception of this year and last year, where we absorbed 70 million feet of big white boxes, our average absorption going forward is 20 million feet a year. That basically corresponds to 1,500 acres. And for somebody that worked on Alliance and went out in 1992 and built the Nestle building, Alliance Gateway, that's just the eastern part over on 377, is 3,000 acres. They have 23 million feet of space, and it took us 35 years to get there. We're absorbing that in 1 year. And then last but not least, where are all these next 4 million people coming? So we're on average building 60,000 homes a year. That translates into 20,000 acres of land. And then the piece on the right-hand side of the slide is what does it take to build that real estate product with additional roads, water, sewer, and drainage offsite. So that gets us to our grand total of 31,000 acres a year, and that's 812 acres. So what I had Isaac do is nobody can kind of figure out what 31,000 acres of land looks like. Well, I'm going to paint you a word picture. I-35, 30, 820, going all the way around. It's called Southeast Fort Worth. 28,000 acres of land is what we are absorbed, is kind of that word picture. So think of that and then look at the map. We are growing and absorbing, unless there is some dramatic change, a red blob a year going forward between now and 2050. That's 25 red blobs at 31,000 acres. Then you go back and think about how we got to where we were, and you kind of begin to look at, what do we do about this? So the one thing I will tell you, back to nothing about us is for us without us, is if anything that I'm talking about this morning kind of scares you about how you think the future is going to be for our kids and our grandkids, then get involved and do public engagement. City of Fort Worth is gearing up to do their 2050 plan. So show up at public meetings and what is it that you like about Fort Worth? What is it that you want to keep? What do you want to keep in Tarrant County? What is it about our lifestyle over here that differentiates us from those people over there on the east? Then you got to get engaged on this. So I will leave you with this because I am rapidly running out of time. And it's always hard for me to get through Jeremiah. I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. So for the business people in this room today, nobody handed you your future. You go make it. Same thing with what we've got to do for the Metroplex in 2050. Y'all, thank you for your attention. Appreciate it.